The box my father left me contained a secret I wasn't ready for. The funeral had ended, but the weight of it still pressed down on me like a stone. People moved around me in hushed tones, offering condolences that blurred together into a fog of words I could barely hear. My father's coffin had been lowered into the ground only hours earlier, and yet the world already seemed to expect me to move forward. I stood there, numb, trying to hold myself together, while everything inside me felt like it was unraveling. As the crowd began to thin, one of my father's closest friends approached me. His face was lined with grief, but his eyes carried something else too, something heavier, almost secretive. He held out a small wooden box, polished but worn at the edges, as if it had been handled many times before. "He wanted you to have this," he said softly. My hands shook as I took it, the weight of the box far greater than its size suggested. I turned it over in my hands, studying the smooth surface. It was simple, unadorned, except for a faint carving on the lid that looked like initials, though they weren't ones I recognized. My heart pounded as I tried to open it, but the lid wouldn't budge. That's when I noticed the small brass lock on the front, gleaming faintly in the dim light. It was locked, and there was no key in sight. Confusion mixed with curiosity as I held the box closer. Why would my father leave me something I couldn't open? What was inside that needed to be locked away even from me? The thought unsettled me, because my father had never been a man of secrets, or at least, that's what I had always believed. Now, staring at the box, I wasn't so sure. I slipped the box into my bag, trying to ignore the way it seemed to burn against my side. People were still watching me, waiting for me to say something, but I couldn't focus on them. My mind was already consumed by the mystery of what I had just been given. It felt less like a gift and more like a burden, one I hadn't asked for but couldn't refuse. On the drive home, I kept glancing at the box on the seat beside me. The lock glinted every time the streetlights passed, as if mocking me. I thought about my father's last days, about the way he had grown quieter, more distant, as if something weighed on him that he couldn't share. Was this box the reason? Was this his way of telling me what he couldn't say out loud? When I finally reached home, I placed the box on the table and sat in front of it, staring at it as though it might open on its own. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. I reached out and ran my fingers over the lid, tracing the strange initials carved into the wood. They felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's story, not mine. I tried to imagine what could be inside. Letters, photographs, something valuable, or something darker, something he had hidden away for a reason. The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that whatever was inside, it wasn't meant to be simple. My father had left me a puzzle, and I wasn't sure I wanted to solve it. Still, I couldn't ignore the pull of it. The box seemed to whisper to me, daring me to find the key, to uncover the truth it held. I knew I wouldn't be able to rest until I did. My father had chosen me, out of everyone, to carry this secret forward. That thought both terrified and intrigued me. I didn't know it then, but the box would change everything I thought I knew about him. I spent the next morning in my father's study, surrounded by the smell of old paper and dust. His belongings were scattered across the desk, and I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me as I tried to organize them. Every object I touched carried a memory, his glasses, his fountain pen, even the worn leather chair he used to sit in. But no matter how many things I sorted, my eyes kept drifting back to the wooden box resting silently on the corner of the desk, locked and waiting. I told myself I would focus on the task at hand, but curiosity gnawed at me. I needed to find the key. It became less about tidying his belongings and more about searching for answers. I opened drawers, checked under stacks of papers, and even shook out old books, hoping something would fall free. Nothing. The box remained sealed, its secret just out of reach, and my frustration grew with every passing minute. Finally, I turned to his wardrobe, pulling out jackets and coats that still carried the faint scent of his cologne. My fingers brushed against the lining of one old jacket, and I felt something small and solid tucked deep inside the pocket. My heart skipped as I reached in and pulled it out. It was a tiny brass key, dull with age but unmistakably important. I held it in my palm, staring at it as though it might vanish if I blinked. Could this be it? Could this be the key to the box that had haunted me since the funeral? My hands trembled as I walked back to the desk, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. The box seemed to watch me, waiting, daring me to try. I knelt beside the desk and slid the key into the lock. For a moment it resisted, as if testing my resolve. Then, with a soft click, it turned. The sound was louder than it should have been, echoing in the silence of the room. My breath caught in my throat as I realized I was about to see what my father had hidden from me. I hesitated, my fingers resting on the lid. Part of me wanted to stop, to leave the box closed and pretend I had never found the key. Maybe some secrets were meant to stay buried. But another part of me, stronger and louder, demanded to know the truth. My father had left this for me, and I couldn't walk away from it now. Slowly, I lifted the lid. The hinges creaked, the sound sharp in the stillness. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I expected to see something ordinary. Old letters, perhaps, or a keepsake from his youth. But as the lid opened wider, I realized this was no ordinary box. Inside, neatly arranged, were items that didn't belong together. A folded envelope with my name written on it, a photograph of people I didn't recognize, and a small bundle of documents tied with string. Each object seemed to hum with significance, as though they carried stories too heavy for words. I reached for the envelope first, my fingers brushing against the familiar handwriting. My father's script, steady and deliberate, stared back at me. My throat tightened as I realized he had written this for me, knowing I would one day find it. The weight of that thought made my hands shake even more. The lock clicked open, and inside was something I never expected. I sat at the desk with the box open in front of me, my eyes fixed on the envelope resting inside. My name was written across it in my father's familiar handwriting, steady and deliberate, the same way he used to sign birthday cards and notes for school. Seeing it now, after his death, made my chest tighten. It felt like he was reaching out from beyond the grave, leaving me something he couldn't say while he was alive. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The paper was thick, sealed carefully, as though he had wanted to make sure no one else opened it before me. I turned it over in my hands, staring at the seal, wondering what could possibly be inside. A part of me wanted to tear it open immediately, but another part hesitated, afraid of what I might find. Finally, I slid my finger under the flap and broke the seal. The sound was louder than I expected, sharp in the silence of the room. I unfolded the letter slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. The words on the page were short, but they carried a weight that made my stomach twist. If you're reading this, then the truth can no longer stay buried. I read the line again and again, hoping I had misunderstood, but the meaning didn't change. The truth. What truth? My father had never been a man of riddles. He was straightforward, practical, the kind of person who believed in saying things plainly. And yet, here he was, leaving me a message that felt more like a warning than a farewell. I leaned back in the chair, the letter shaking in my hands. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it about money, a hidden debt, or something darker, something he had kept from us all these years? The thought made my chest ache. I wanted to believe my father had been the man I thought he was. But this letter suggested otherwise. I looked back into the box, half expecting more answers. But all I saw were the other items, the photograph, the bundle of documents. They seemed to hum with meaning, as though they were waiting for me to connect them to the words in the letter. But right now, all I could feel was confusion and dread. The handwriting was his. There was no doubt about that. Every curve of the letters, every careful stroke was exactly the way I remembered. But the words themselves felt foreign, as if they had been written by a stranger. My father had never spoken like this, never hinted at secrets or truths that needed to be unearthed. I pressed the letter flat on the desk and stared at it, hoping the meaning would reveal itself if I looked long enough. But the words remained the same, heavy and cryptic. The truth can no longer stay buried. It was less a message and more a command, pushing me towards something I wasn't sure I wanted to find. The silence of the room grew heavier, pressing down on me as I tried to steady my breathing. I thought about the locked box, the hidden key, and now this letter. None of it felt accidental. My father had planned this, step by step, knowing I would one day sit here, holding his words in my hands. But what truth was he talking about? I placed the letter gently back into the box, my hands still trembling from the weight of its words. Beneath it, something else caught my eye, a faded photograph tucked neatly at the bottom. I pulled it out carefully, the edges worn and curling as though it had been handled many times before. My breath caught as I turned it over and saw my father's face staring back at me, younger but unmistakably him. He stood with 3 strangers, 2 men and a woman, all smiling, as if they shared a bond I had never known existed. The photograph was old, but not ancient. The colors muted with time, yet still clear enough to make out their expressions. My father's arm was draped casually around the woman's shoulder, his smile wide and unguarded in a way I hadn't seen in years. The two men stood close, one with a hand resting on my father's back, the other leaning in as though they were all part of something intimate, something important. It was a side of him I didn't recognize, a version of him that felt foreign. I turned the photo over, hoping for some explanation, and there it was. A date written in neat ink. My heart skipped as I read it. The year was recent, far too recent to be from his youth. My mind raced, trying to place where he had been at that time, what he had told us he was doing. But the timeline didn't match. He had been with us, hadn't he? Or had he? The realization made my stomach twist. I stared at the faces of the strangers again, searching for clues. The woman looked familiar in a way I couldn't explain, as though I had seen her before in passing, maybe at the funeral or in some forgotten memory. The men were harder to place, but their closeness to my father was undeniable. They weren't just acquaintances. They were part of his life, an entire part I had never been allowed to see. The longer I looked, the more unsettling it became. My father had always been careful with photographs, keeping albums neatly organized, every picture labeled and dated. But this one had been hidden away, locked in a box, as though he hadn't wanted anyone to find it. That secrecy made my chest tighten. What was he hiding? And why had he left it for me to discover now, when he was no longer here to explain? I thought back to the letter, to the words that had shaken me. The truth can no longer stay buried. Was this photograph part of that truth? Was it the beginning of a story he had never told us? My mind filled with questions, each one heavier than the last. Who were these people? What did they mean to him? And why had he kept them hidden from us all these years? The silence of the room pressed in around me as I held the photograph tighter. I wanted to believe there was an innocent explanation, that maybe these were old friends or distant relatives. But the date on the back told me otherwise. This wasn't the past. This was recent. This was a life he had been living while we thought we knew him completely. I felt a wave of anger rise inside me, mixed with confusion and grief. Had he lied to us? Had he built another life in secret, one that didn't include us? The thought made my chest ache, as though I had lost him all over again. The man in the photograph looked happy, content, surrounded by people who clearly mattered to him. But where did that leave us? I placed the photo on the desk beside the letter, staring at them both as if they might explain themselves. But they remained silent, their secrets locked away in the past. My father had left me with pieces of a puzzle, but no instructions on how to put them together. And the more I looked, the more I realized that the man I thought I knew might have been a stranger all along. The man in the photo looked like my father, but the life around him wasn't ours. I pushed the photograph aside, my hands still trembling, and reached deeper into the box. The wood creaked faintly as if it were resisting me, as though it knew what I was about to uncover. My fingers brushed against a bundle of papers tied together with a thin piece of string. I pulled them out carefully, the weight of the stack heavier than I expected, and laid them flat on the desk. The paper smelled faintly of dust and age, but there was something sharper beneath it, like the scent of secrets long hidden. The first document I unfolded was a property deed. My eyes scanned the lines, and my breath caught when I saw the name written at the top. It was my father's face I had seen in the photograph, but the name on this paper wasn't his. It was close, similar enough to make me pause, but it wasn't the name I had grown up with. It was an alias, a second identity, and the realization made my stomach twist. I flipped through the rest of the stack, my pulse quickening with each page. There were receipts from hotels in cities he had never told us he visited, bank statements tied to accounts I had never heard of, and even an identification card with his picture but under the false name. The photo on the ID was unmistakably him, but the man staring back at me suddenly felt like a stranger. The more I read, the more the puzzle pieces began to shift into place. The unexplained absences, the business trips that always seemed vague, the way he sometimes came home distracted and distant, it all started to make sense. He hadn't just been working late or traveling for business. He had been living another life, one that none of us had ever known about. I leaned back in the chair, the document spread out before me like evidence in a case I hadn't wanted to solve. My father had always been a man of order, of routine, someone who believed in honesty and discipline. At least that's what I thought. But these papers told a different story, one of deception and careful planning. He had built an entire identity in the shadows, and I couldn't understand why. Anger bubbled up inside me, sharp and hot. How could he have done this? How could he have looked us in the eyes, told us he loved us, and then walked away to live as someone else? The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined, and yet beneath the anger was something else. Fear. If he had hidden this from us, what else had he been hiding? I picked up the ID again, staring at his face under the false name. The man in the picture looked calm, confident, as though he belonged to that identity as much as he belonged to ours. It wasn't just a disguise. It was a life he had chosen, one he had lived alongside us without ever letting us see. The thought made my chest ache, as though I had lost him all over again. The receipts told their own story. Restaurants, hotels, even small purchases that painted a picture of a man who had been comfortable in this other skin. He hadn't just used the name for convenience. He had lived in it, breathed in it, built something real with it. And now, with him gone, I was left to piece together the fragments of a life I had never been invited into. I gathered the documents back into a pile, my hands shaking as I tied the string around them again. The box no longer felt like a gift. It felt like a confession, one my father hadn't been brave enough to make while he was alive. He had left me with the burden of his secrets, and I wasn't sure I wanted to carry them. Had my father been living a double life? I sat at the desk long after I had finished sorting through the documents, my eyes fixed on one detail I couldn't ignore. Scribbled in the corner of a receipt, almost as if it had been added in haste, was a phone number. The ink was slightly smudged, but the digits were clear enough to read. My pulse quickened as I stared at it. Why would my father leave a number hidden among these papers? Who was it meant for, me or someone else? I picked up my phone and typed the digits slowly, my thumb hovering over the call button. Doubt gnawed at me. What if it was nothing? What if it led to more questions I wasn't ready to face? But the thought of ignoring it felt worse. My father had left me this trail for a reason, and I couldn't turn away now. With a deep breath, I pressed the button and lifted the phone to my ear. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. My heart pounded harder with each passing second. Just as I was about to hang up, a voice answered. It was low, calm, and unsettlingly certain. "I've been waiting for this call," the stranger said. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't surprised. They weren't confused. They had been expecting me. For a moment, I couldn't speak. My mind raced with possibilities. How could they have known I would call? Had my father told them about me? Or had they been waiting for anyone who stumbled across his secrets? The silence stretched, and I realized the stranger wasn't going to explain unless I asked, "Who are you?" I finally managed, my voice unsteady. The stranger chuckled softly, not unkindly, but with a familiarity that made my skin prickle. "That's not the question you should be asking," they replied. "The question is, how much did he tell you before he died?" My grip on the phone tightened. My father hadn't told me anything. He had left me with a box, a letter, and a storm of confusion. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "He didn't tell me anything," I admitted. "I found the box. I found the documents. That's all." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a sigh that sounded almost like relief. "Then it's time you learned the rest," the stranger said. Their tone was final, as though they had been carrying this burden for years, waiting for the moment it would finally be passed on. I leaned back in the chair, my heart racing. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper, as though the very walls were listening. Whoever this person was, they weren't just some random contact. They knew my father, maybe better than I ever had, and now they were about to tell me things I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. The stranger's voice softened, almost conspiratorial. He trusted me with the truth he couldn't share with you. But now, it's your turn to carry it. My stomach twisted at the weight of those words. I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't wanted to inherit secrets, but it was too late to turn back. I opened my mouth to ask another question, but the stranger spoke first. "Meet me tomorrow." Same cafe he always used? "You'll know which one." The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone in my hand, the silence ringing louder than any words. Whoever they were, they knew my father better than I did. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the kind of place where the hum of conversation was low, and the clinking of cups seemed louder than it should. I scanned the room nervously until I saw someone sitting alone in the corner, their eyes fixed on me the moment I walked in. There was no hesitation, no doubt. They had been waiting for me. My stomach tightened as I made my way over, the weight of the box's secrets pressing down on me with every step. The stranger was older, with sharp eyes that seemed to see more than I wanted them to. They gestured for me to sit, and I slid into the chair across from them, my palms damp against the table. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate, until finally the stranger leaned forward. "You look just like him," they said quietly. The words made my chest ache, though I wasn't sure if it was pride or fear. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. "You said you knew my father. Who are you?" The stranger gave a small, humorless smile. "Who I am doesn't matter. What matters is who he was, and what that makes you." My pulse quickened at the cryptic reply. I wanted to demand answers, but something in their tone told me I wasn't ready for all of them yet. They reached into their coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper, sliding it across the table. I hesitated before opening it, my eyes scanning the faded emblem at the top. It wasn't anything I recognized, but the design was official, almost military. Beneath it were names, dates, and codes that made no sense to me. "Your father worked for them," the stranger said. A secretive organization, one that doesn't exist on paper, but has shaped more lives than you can imagine. My breath caught. My father, the man who had spent his life teaching me about honesty, about discipline, about living a simple life? I shook my head, unable to reconcile the image I had of him with the one the stranger was painting. "That's not possible," I whispered, but the stranger's eyes didn't waver. "It's not only possible, it's the truth." They leaned closer, their voice dropping to a near whisper. "He walked away from them years ago. He wanted a normal life, a family, peace. But you don't just walk away from people like that without consequences." They let him go, but they never forgot. And neither did he. The words sent a chill down my spine. Suddenly, the absences, the secrecy, the documents under another name, they all began to make sense in a way I hadn't wanted them to. I thought of the letter he had left me, the one that had warned me the truth could no longer stay buried. Was this what he had meant? That his past was finally catching up, and I was the one left to face it? My hand shook as I folded the paper back up, sliding it across the table again. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. The stranger's expression softened, though their eyes remained sharp. "Because you deserve to know who he really was. And because whether you like it or not, his choices are now yours to carry. You're part of this story, whether you wanted to be or not." My chest tightened, the weight of their words pressing down on me like a stone. I wanted to argue, to deny it, to walk away and pretend none of this was real. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. My father had left me the box for a reason. He had chosen me to uncover the truth, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew about him. And now, sitting across from this stranger, I realized the truth wasn't just about him, it was about me too. The stranger's eyes locked onto mine, unblinking, as they spoke the words that would haunt me long after I left that cafe. "Your father wasn't who you thought he was, and neither are you." The cafe felt smaller the longer I sat there, the stranger's words pressing in on me like walls closing tight. They leaned forward, their voice low but steady, as if every word carried the weight of years. "Your father wasn't just part of that organization," they said. "He was trusted. He was family to them. But in the end, he betrayed them. And that betrayal cost him everything." My chest tightened, the word betrayal echoing in my head like a bell I couldn't unhear. I shook my head, struggling to reconcile the image of my father, the man who taught me right from wrong, with the man being described now. "He betrayed them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The stranger nodded slowly. "Not for selfish reasons. He did it to protect you, to protect your mother, to protect the life he wanted to build. But walking away from them meant making enemies he could never fully escape." They slid the photograph I'd found across the table, their finger tapping lightly on the faces beside my father. These weren't just colleagues. They were like family to him once. They trained together, lived together, trusted each other with their lives. For years, they were closer to him than anyone else. But when he chose to leave, he broke that bond. And not everyone forgave him. I stared at the faces in the photo, my eyes lingering on the woman with the faint smile, the two men standing close. They didn't look dangerous. They looked ordinary, even warm. But the stranger's words painted them in a different light. They weren't just strangers. They were pieces of my father's hidden past. People who had once been his world. The stranger's voice softened, almost regretful. "He never told you because he wanted to keep you safe. If you had known, if you had been connected to that part of his life, you would have been a target too. So he buried it. He locked it away. But secrets like that don't stay buried forever. My throat tightened as I realized the truth of it. The box, the letter, the documents, they weren't just confessions. They were warnings. I thought of the letter again. The words that had haunted me. The truth can no longer stay buried. My father hadn't been speaking in riddles. He had been preparing me for this moment, for the reality that his past was now mine to face. The thought made my stomach twist with both fear and anger. The stranger leaned back, their eyes never leaving mine. One of them turned against him, they said quietly. Someone he trusted more than anyone else. That betrayal was the reason he left, the reason he built a new life. But betrayal leaves scars, and enemies don't just disappear. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, cutting deeper than I wanted them to. I clenched my fists under the table, my mind racing. Who was it? Which one of the faces in the photograph had betrayed him? And what did that mean for me now? The stranger didn't offer names, only silence, as if letting me sit with the weight of the revelation. The cafe around us seemed to fade, the clinking of cups and low murmur of voices drowned out by the pounding of my heart. My father's past wasn't just a story, it was alive, breathing, and reaching into my present. And if one of them had turned against him, then maybe they hadn't stopped watching. Maybe they were still out there, but one of them had turned against him, and might still be out there. I returned home from the cafe with my mind spinning, the stranger's words echoing in my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something far bigger than I could understand. The box still sat on my desk, its contents spread out like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. My hands shook as I reached for it again, determined to see if I had missed anything. Something told me there was more hidden inside, something my father had left behind for me to find only when I was ready. I lifted the documents and the photograph, setting them aside carefully. Beneath them, pressed flat against the bottom of the box, was another envelope. My breath caught as I pulled it free. It was thinner than the first letter, but sealed just as carefully. My name was written across the front again, though this time the handwriting seemed rushed, almost desperate. My chest tightened as I broke the seal and unfolded the paper inside. The letter was short, only a few lines, but the words chilled me to the bone. If you've opened this, then you know more than I ever wanted you to. But be careful. Not everyone who comes to you will be a friend. Some will claim to know me, to know the truth, but their loyalty is not to you. Trust no one until you are certain. And remember, once the box is open, you are no longer invisible. I read the words again and again, my pulse quickening with each pass. My father had known this would happen. He had known that once I opened the box, others would come forward. People like the stranger in the cafe. But how could I know who to trust? The thought made my stomach twist. I had already spoken to someone, already listened to their story. What if that had been a mistake? The room suddenly felt colder, the shadows deeper. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside. The letter's warning echoed in my mind. You are no longer invisible. It was as if the act of opening the box had painted a target on my back, drawing eyes I couldn't see but could feel. My father hadn't just left me secrets, he had left me danger. I thought back to the stranger's words, to the way they had known I would call, the way they had spoken with such certainty about my father's past. At the time, I had believed them because I had wanted answers. But now, doubt gnawed at me. What if they weren't telling me the truth? What if they were the very person my father had warned me about? I folded the letter carefully, my hands trembling, and placed it back into the box. The weight of it felt heavier than before, as though the wood itself carried the burden of everything inside. My father hadn't left me a gift. He had left me a responsibility, one I hadn't asked for and wasn't sure I could carry. But it was mine now, whether I wanted it or not. The silence of the house pressed in around me, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards. I froze listening, my heart pounding. Was it just the house settling, or was someone really there? The paranoia the letter had planted in me grew stronger with every sound, every shadow. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to peer outside. The street was empty, quiet, but the unease didn't fade. If my father's warning was true, then the moment I had opened the box, I had stepped into a world where nothing was safe, not even my own home. I turned back to the desk, staring at the box as though it might answer me. It no longer looked like a simple wooden container. It looked like a trap, a beacon, something that had been waiting for me to open it so the past could finally find me. My father had left me with more than secrets. He had left me with enemies. The box wasn't just a gift, it was a target. I couldn't stop staring at the photograph, the faces etched into my mind like ghosts refusing to fade. The stranger at the cafe had told me these people were once like family to my father, but one of them had betrayed him. That thought gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know more. I had to see for myself. So I began searching. Old addresses from the documents, names scribbled in margins, anything that could lead me to one of them. Days passed in a blur until finally I found a lead. One of the men in the photo was still alive. Living quietly in a nearby city, the journey there felt unreal, as though I were stepping into someone else's story. My father's world was bleeding into mine, and I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. When I finally stood outside the modest apartment building, my heart pounded so hard I thought it might give me away. I hesitated at the door, wondering if I was ready for the answers waiting inside. But the photograph in my pocket pushed me forward. He opened the door after my knock. Older now, his hair graying, but his face unmistakable. It was the same man from the photograph, standing beside my father with a smile that had once seemed so genuine. His eyes widened when he saw me, and for a moment I thought he might slam the door shut. Instead, he whispered, "You look just like him." The words sent a chill down my spine. I introduced myself, my voice unsteady, and showed him the photograph. His hands trembled as he took it, his eyes lingering on my father's face. "I never thought I'd see this again," he murmured. I asked him about the photograph, about the people in it, about my father's past. He hesitated, then motioned for me to come inside. The air in his apartment was heavy with silence, as though it too carried secrets. He began to speak slowly, carefully, as though each word carried weight. He told me that he and my father had once been part of something bigger, something secretive, but he painted it differently than the stranger at the cafe had. According to him, my father hadn't betrayed anyone. He had been betrayed. He said my father had been forced out, framed by someone he trusted, and that leaving had been his only way to survive. I listened, my mind spinning. This version of the story didn't match what I had been told before. The stranger had said my father was the one who betrayed them, that he had walked away by choice. But this man insisted it was the opposite, that my father had been the victim, not the traitor. The contradiction made my stomach twist. Both stories couldn't be true. I pressed him for details, but he grew quiet, his eyes darting toward the window as though someone might be listening. "There are things I can't say," he whispered. "Not here, not now, but know this. Your father wasn't the man they told you he was. He was better. He was braver." His voice cracked with emotion, and I couldn't tell if it was grief or guilt. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe my father had been the hero in this story, not the betrayer. But doubt gnawed at me. Why would the stranger lie? Why would this man lie? Both had known my father, both had been close to him, and yet their stories painted him in completely different lights. The truth was slipping through my fingers like sand, and I didn't know which version to hold on to. As I left the apartment, the photograph heavy in my pocket, I felt more lost than ever. Two people who had known my father, two stories that couldn't both be true. My father had left me with a box full of secrets, but the more I uncovered, the less I understood. The truth was out there, but it was tangled in lies, and I was caught in the middle. Someone was lying. But who? I spread the documents across the desk, my hands trembling as I pieced them together like fragments of a shattered mirror. Receipts, letters, coded notes, and official-looking files all pointed to the same conclusion. My father hadn't just been part of the organization, the one the stranger had spoken of. He had turned against it. Every page I read revealed more of the truth he had tried so hard to bury. He had betrayed them, not for greed or power, but for us. For me, for my mother. For the life he wanted to protect. The betrayal wasn't simple. It wasn't a single act. It was years of quiet resistance, of feeding false information, of sabotaging missions from within. The documents showed how carefully he had played his part, how close he had come to being discovered. Each risk he took was calculated, but the danger was constant. He had lived every day knowing that if they found out, it would mean death. Not just for him, but for everyone he loved. I read one letter over and over, written in his hand, but never sent. I can't choose between the life they demand and the life I want. So I choose neither. I choose to protect you, even if it means they call me a traitor. My throat tightened as I realized the weight he had carried. He hadn't been a coward. He had been a man torn in two, forced to make impossible choices. And in the end, he had chosen us. The photograph made sense now. Those people had once been his family, his comrades. But when he turned against the organization, he had turned against them too. Some of them might have understood, but one had not. One had betrayed him in return, forcing him to vanish into another life, to build walls of lies around us so that we would never know the danger lurking just beyond. The box was more than a collection of secrets. It was a record, a confession, and a shield. The documents inside weren't just memories, they were proof. Proof of what he had done, proof of what he had risked, proof of why he could never tell us the truth while he was alive. He had left it for me because he knew the past would eventually catch up, and someone would need to carry the burden forward. I sat back in the chair, staring at the papers spread before me. My father wasn't the man I thought he was, but he wasn't the villain I had feared either. He was something more complicated, both hero and betrayer, both protector and liar. He had lived in the shadows so that we could live in the light, and now those shadows had fallen on me. The stranger's words echoed in my mind. Your father wasn't who you thought he was, and neither are you. I understood them now. By leaving me the box, my father had passed the torch. The secrets were mine to guard, the choices mine to make. I hadn't asked for this legacy, but it was mine all the same. I thought about burning the documents, destroying them so no one could ever use them against us. But I also thought about keeping them, about using them to uncover the full truth, to finish what my father had started. Both paths were dangerous, both heavy with consequences. My father hadn't been able to choose, and now the decision had fallen to me. The silence of the room pressed in, broken only by the ticking of the clock. I stared at the box, cracked but whole, and felt the weight of his life pressing down on mine. The truth was no longer buried. It was here in my hands demanding an answer. The choice he couldn't make was now mine. I sat in the dim light of my father's study, the documents spread out before me like a map of choices I didn't want to make. Each page carried the weight of his decisions, his betrayals, his sacrifices. My hands hovered over them, torn between the urge to destroy everything and the pull to preserve it. If I burned them, the past would vanish into ash, and maybe I could finally breathe. But if I kept them, I would inherit his burden, his enemies, and the dangerous legacy he had tried so hard to shield me from. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, its glow tempting me with the promise of release. I imagined tossing the papers into the flames, watching the ink curl and blacken until nothing remained but smoke. It would be so easy, so final. No one would ever know what he had done, and I could walk away, free from the shadows he had left behind. But even as I pictured it, my chest tightened. Destroying the truth wouldn't erase it. It would only bury it again, waiting for someone else to stumble upon it. I thought of the stranger at the cafe, of the man from the photograph, of the conflicting stories they had told me. Lies and half-truths tangled together, leaving me unsure of who to trust. But the documents in front of me, they were real. They were proof. Proof of what my father had risked. Proof of why he had lived in fear. Proof of the choices he hadn't been able to make. If I destroyed them, I would never know the full story. And worse, I would never be able to finish it. My father had carried this weight alone, but he hadn't left me the box by accident. He had chosen me, trusted me, even if I hadn't asked for it. The thought made my throat tighten. He hadn't been perfect. He had lied, he had hidden, he had betrayed. But he had done it all for us, for me. And now, whether I wanted it or not, his story was mine to carry forward. I gathered the documents into a neat stack, my hands steady now. I didn't throw them into the fire. I didn't bury them. Instead, I placed them back into the wooden box, the same box that had started all of this. The lid creaked as I closed it, the cracks in the wood catching the light. It wasn't perfect. It was scarred, fractured, but still whole. Just like the truth it carried, I ran my fingers over the surface, tracing the imperfections. The box was more than a container now. It was a reminder of who my father had been, of the choices he had made, and of the choices he couldn't. It was a reminder that the past couldn't be erased, only carried forward, reshaped by those who inherited it. The silence of the room pressed in, but it no longer felt suffocating. It felt heavy, yes, but also alive, filled with possibility. I didn't know what the future would hold, or what dangers might come from keeping the truth. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't run from it. I wouldn't bury it. I would face it, even if it meant stepping into the same shadows my father had once walked. I lifted the box and held it close, feeling the weight of it settle into me. It wasn't just his story anymore. It was mine. The lies, the betrayals, the sacrifices. They were threads in a tapestry I hadn't chosen, but one I would finish. My father had left me with questions, but he had also left me with the chance to find answers. I placed the box back on the desk, the cracks catching the light one last time. They weren't flaws anymore. They were scars, proof of survival, proof of truth. And as I looked at them, I realized that the story wasn't over. It was only beginning, and it was mine to tell. The cracks told a story, and this time, it was mine to finish.